It's podcast time again. And this time we're tackling a topic that so many people get confused on. We're talking about cultural appropriation. And if I have time, maybe a little bit of Indigenous engagement. Bonjour, Mishko Pognon Quain Edition Mangdo Dam. Hi everybody, my name is Sandy Boucher. I'm Red Thunderbolt Woman of the Loon Clan, a proud member of Seine River First Nation in Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario, and today we're talking about cultural appropriation because there is so much confusion. So first off, cultural appropriation is often linked to that extraction mentality I've talked about in previous videos. That idea that in many non-Indigenous European-based cultures, like colonial, I want to colonize an area, take what we can get and just send it back to the homeland. It's that taking that is the problem. The total disrespect for where the line is. That extraction mentality has caused so much harm in so many places on this planet, yet still it continues. So, of course, I'm going to come at this from an Indigenous lens, and there's so much confusion over what I can and can't do from the non-Indigenous people that are trying to be respectful. So, let's talk about purchasing Indigenous art or crafts. If you purchase them from an authentic Indigenous artisan, and I guarantee you, by the way, it's the word inspired you got to watch out for. If on the tag it says created by an Indigenous artisan or authentic Indigenous art, you're good. If it says inspired by Indigenous art or inspired by Indigenous artisans, cancel. That's cultural appropriation. Those people had no right to be making those items and selling them. Now, if you have purchased items from an Indigenous artisan, feel free to wear them. Wear the earrings, hang the paintings. We appreciate the help in boosting our economy. Thank you very much. Do not purchase it if it's not authentic, because then you're supporting cultural appropriation. So a large part of why I wanted to do this video was a comment in one of the threads on I don't even remember what video was, but what they were saying is, what if you have a non-Indigenous person that was raised in Indigenous culture, and does that make them more Indigenous than an Indigenous person that was totally separate from their culture? I'm hoping every single one of the people watching this know the answer to this. This should be a given, but I don't want to assume. So I'm going to get crystal clear here. Red thunderbolt, lightning bolt, clear. You don't choose to be Indigenous. It's not a choice. You either are or you're not. You have the bloodline or you're not. It doesn't matter if you were exposed to your culture, especially since we're not going to crucify the people that were removed from their culture. The people that were taken into foster care, that were in the 60 scoop, authentically in the 60 scoop. It is not their fault that they never received the teachings that are part of their culture, and they're probably suffering because of it. So I don't care how much you know about Indigenous culture, it does not make you Indigenous. You can marry in and have a status card and still not, you may be legally Indigenous, but you don't have a right to speak for Indigenous people because that is not your cultural lens. That is not your worldview. I know people that have worked in Indigenous communities and with Indigenous people their entire lives. And the ones that I value are the ones that are humble enough to realize they never cross the line into mine. And there's the line. You may know a lot about Indigenous culture. It is not your culture. You may know how to bead. I have taught non-Indigenous people how to bead. right? Our traditional crafts. They know they can't turn around and make those things and sell them because it wouldn't be authentic. They understand the humility. They understand where the line is. Now, just to confuse this even more, there are non-Indigenous people that carry sacred items. They might have a hand drum, that might have an eagle feather, that might smudge with the Indigenous traditional medicines. I'm not talking about the smudging that you can buy in those shops. I'm talking about Indigenous specific. Because if you're buying it in a shop, it's not Indigenous specific. But I digress. Those people, the magic word in this case is gifted. If you were gifted a hand drum, if you were gifted the eagle feather, if you were gifted, I'm not going to list off all our sacred items because it's none of your business. But if you were gifted it, that means the person that gifted it to you recognizes in you the respect and the humility to carry that item. We do not advertise the items we have. And if you run into someone who is boasting about all the elders they know and how many sacred items they have, run as fast as you can the other way. Because that's a person that is either a pretendian or someone who has been so warped out by the colonial influence that they're not even sharing traditional teachings anymore. They're sharing tainted teachings. Just had a really good conversation with an Indigenous elder about that, someone who had seen one of my videos. So that was awesome. What if you're immersed in the culture as an adult? Consider yourself lucky. Another thing, another line, if someone appreciates you and sees in you respect and humility and wants to share Indigenous teachings with you, at no time does that give you the right to teach them. There's the line. You can take in those teachings and you can use them for your benefit. I would even say the benefit of your partner and your children because you're taking care of your family. You do not have the right to teach our teachings. If anything, if you truly understand the humility teaching, whoever is interested in learning what you know, you would be sending them back to the teacher you got them from. You must never be the Indigenous voice. So you got to stop short of that teaching. Bottom line, you're either Indigenous or not. That's why I'm not into the whole blood quantum thing. There is the bloodline, and maybe you're so far removed from it. Well, then transparency, you say that. But the bloodline's still there. The blood memory is still there. Things are going to resonate with you, and you don't even know why, and that's your blood memory. But just because non-Indigenous people think our teachings are cool and they really like our regalia, and they think, the one I always hear is your teachings seem to be so much common sense. They're grounded. I agree. That doesn't mean they're yours. We can walk together. We can share with each other. Relationship first. Quit shopping and extracting our teachings and build bridges and relationships first. Then you will benefit from all we know without having to take it and causing more harm. I hope that made sense. I hope that absolutely made sense. Cultural appropriate. Feel free to share your examples in the comments because it's hard to think of all the examples. But if as soon as you're starting to reference Indigenous teachings as your own, you cross the line. As soon as you start teaching Indigenous teachings and you're not Indigenous, you've crossed the line. If you're bragging about what you have, you've crossed the line. And if you're buying from someone that isn't an Indigenous artisan, an Indigenous person, then you're helping the wrong side of this discussion. I hope that made sense. I know it's complicated, but you know what? Humility teaching. Remember the path? Patience, awareness, tenacity, and humility. Humility always has you standing on solid ground. It's when ego gets into it and mine and I have the right. Danger, because it's that attitude that has burnt bridges throughout our existence. Last but not least, I know so many people, and I'm going to assume a large amount of the people that are watching my channel, but I know definitely a large amount of the people I work with are interested in improving their, what I call their Indigenous engagement game. They want to get better at engaging with Indigenous people. So I came up with this little quiz. I guess I've been doing seminars for so long, everything becomes a quiz or a handout. Welcome to my world. I call it Rate Your Indigenous Engagement Game. So the idea is give yourself a score from 1 to 10. And how many are there? There's only 4, right? You know what I'm going to do? We're going to make this easier. You know where my brain went, right? All the math people did. Give yourself a score out of 25 for each. Then you're going to end up with your percent out of 100 at the end, right? So 1, I never freaking do this. 25, I do it all the time. Lots of numbers in between. So the first question is, remember, we're rating your Indigenous engagement game. Number 1, how often do you speak to Indigenous people? That is the question. How often do you speak to Indigenous people? Scale of 1 to 25. 1, there's no Indigenous people around where I live, so I can't. I hope you realize that was intentional, that we got moved out of the way so that your ancestors could be there. Just saying. 25, I live in the middle of a First Nation community. I speak to Indigenous people all the time. Okay? So, scale of 1 to 25, how often do you speak to Indigenous people? Second one, going to change that perspective a little bit. Out of 25 again, 1 to 25, 1 never, 25 all the time, as often as I breathe. Number 2, how often do you speak with Indigenous people? The back and forth, the conversation, the two-way. Not speaking to them like I'm speaking to you right now, the one-way conversation, the education, that kind of thing, teachers speaking to, right? I'm talking about friends, sharing. How often do you speak with Indigenous people? 1 to 25. Third one, closely related, but we're going to take it up a notch. How often do you listen to the guidance or sharing of Indigenous peoples? Not just hear, listen to, take it in, feel the emotion or the story behind it. How often do you listen to Indigenous peoples? 1 to 25. 1, never, 25, all the time. My best friend's Indigenous. And by the way, if it's only one Indigenous person, I don't want you to give yourself a 25. Scale it back a little bit. If you got 5, 10 people you know that are Indigenous and you're back and forth with them on a regular basis, you earned your 25. And the last one is probably the hardest one. And I'm hoping you realize that when you do your scoring. How often do you accept as true what Indigenous people say? How often do you accept as true what Indigenous people say? When we are talking about Indigenous issues, Indigenous communities, Indigenous people, how often are you honoring the back-to-back teaching and accepting that we know what we're talking about, we are experts in this field, and you listen and accept what we have to say? So the last one is, how often do you accept what Indigenous people have to say on Indigenous matters, people, issues, communities, whatever it is? Now, obviously, I am no math whiz because math is not my forte at all. I'm an author, not a mathematician. Add up your score, and you're going to get a number out of 100. That's important. So maybe you got a 60, maybe you got a 70, whatever the case may be. But most importantly, if you draw a circle and divide it into 4, like the medicine wheel teachings, you have 4 quadrants now. Which one needs some work? Do you need to get better at actually speaking to Indigenous people, speaking with us, listening to us, or accepting what we have to say? Which area? You just developed your very own action plan for Indigenous engagement. If you want to improve your Indigenous engagement game, you now have the plan, and it's specific to you. There is no wrong answers. Unless you were being dishonest, then you're doing it to you. So I hope not. I have a lightning bolt here for you in true Red Thunderbolt woman style. This hang on to your seat for a sec, because this is as blunt as it gets, but it is that important. For the assimilation and the white supremacy to end, non-Indigenous individuals have to stop acting like you have a say on Indigenous matters. I'm going to repeat that. For the assimilation and white supremacy to end, non-Indigenous people have to stop acting like you have a say on Indigenous issues. It is that simple. I'm sorry. It's just that blunt. You don't get to decide who's Indigenous. We do. You don't get to decide what we need to succeed. We know, whether you believe it or not. You don't get to decide how we operate in this world, because we will operate as Indigenous people if the assimilation ends. Because demanding we're more like you is exactly how we got in this mess in the first place. Again, we are just looking for safe spaces, the spaces where we have enough room to be us, like this office. I hope that made sense. A slightly shorter version of the podcast this week, but a powerhouse podcast nevertheless. And I'm looking forward to your comments in the community, in the thread, whatever the case may be. I hope that made sense. Take care of you. I love you. Bye-bye.